Today we're gonna paint Tai Lopez. What up friends, Liron here. Thank you for joining me in another video, and today I'm gonna share with you a full portrait painting process of me working on a portrait of Tai Lopez. I actually got this picture of him, edited it a bit, and just created this kind of thing for me to work from that just simplifies all of the values in the picture because it was a rather complex one. And in any case, I want to share with you the entire process. I don't think I'll do a time-lapse video for this one, maybe in the future, I don't know, because it seems like it's just a double content, and sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. But in any case, I used only 3 colors for this one, and they're all Daniel Smiths. So we got the phthalo blue, quinacridone rose, and what was it? New Gamboge. Okay, so only these 3 have been used to produce this, and that's a really cool result. So more on that in a moment, and you'll see me going through the process. I'm really pleased with how this one turned out, and I think there is going to be a lot of value in this one. Okay, so if you're ready, I'm going to change the angle, and we're going to get started.
Okay, so I'm getting started. Basically mixing a large quantity of phthalo blue, because this is the color I'm going to use for the hair. And I'm just going to start out with this one. I really tried using a lot of individual colors, especially for the first wash, because I keep learning this again and again, that if you don't use like immediately a pure color and you start mixing from the first wash, you tend to lose a lot of the vibrancy. So what I'm doing now is very simple. I'm just filling in the area of the head. Now what you're watching is double speed, and later on I'm gonna speed it up to triple speed. I don't always mention what I'm using exactly. By the way, now I'm mixing it with a bit of quinacridone rose, so I'm not usually not always remember to explain exactly what materials I'm using. So this is basically my silver black velvet brush. The paper is Saunders Waterford hot pressed. Okay, I think I'll put a link in the description box to everything, like even links to Amazon. I started using affiliate links, which basically means if you buy through my link, you pay the same amount and I get a commission. So I'll probably put all of the links in the description box, to the paints, to the brushes, even to the paper, if I'll find it. I don't buy this paper off of Amazon. I buy it in large sheets. So in any case, I'm gonna use again the primary trio I've been using for a while now: the phthalo blue, the quinacridone rose, and the new gamboge. So now I'm trying to produce this sort of an orangey reddish color. You can see it's quite muted, and I have to work rather fast because I don't want the edges near the hair to dry on me. Okay, now it's been a while since I did this process, so I probably have forgotten some of the stages. But I'll try and do my best to explain exactly what I'm doing. So there's this highlight there on the forehead. It's one of the most prominent highlights here, so it's important to get it. Very often you'll find that there's like a major highlight on the forehead. It just is a very common situation. Now I'm making use of some wet in wet because this area is still wet. I'm injecting more paint into it before moving onwards, and I'm using the line of the glasses as kind of a break, because they're gonna be so much darker than that you won't notice if I stop the wash here and then continue it later on. Now, if I was a little more brave, I would just continue over the glasses, of course avoiding the highlights, because the glasses have some highlights on them, and just moving onwards. But I decided to use this as kind of a checkpoint in a video game that allows me to stop for a moment and be safe, you know, have everything, all of my progress so far saved. Now I want to divert your attention to the beautiful transition from the blue of the hair and into the forehead. This is why I want to keep the wash even, because there's this nice blending effect that is really important for me to get right. Okay. By the way, with this painting, I struggled a bit with getting things to look as dark as I wanted to, and I find this to be often an issue when using hot pressed paper, which is why I don't like it. I don't like how the paint behaves on it. Let's say how the water evaporates. It's much harder for me to blend edges. it's just a big challenge. Everything I'm used to doing is just harder on hot pressed. And it could be lack of skills on my part, but in any case, I kept layering over and over, and you'll see this later on, and it just didn't get to be as dark as I wanted. And I don't remember if I just decided at some point, okay, enough is enough, and I just moved on, or if I was able to get the darkness I wanted. But in any case, I'm very pleased with the final result. What I'm doing now is drying the brush on the towel and lifting up some areas that need to be lighter. You saw me lifting some of the bottom. Now under the eye there's this area that should have been lighter. So yeah, the brush I'm using now is size 12. I have another silver black velvet brush, size 8. These are my most commonly used, or my most often used brushes that I find myself using the most. I find them really good for pretty much everything that I need. Now there's a highlight at the bottom of the glasses that you notice that I'm trying to paint around. You can see this on the other side that I'm already done with. Just lifted some of the paint there because I wanted the iris area to have some kind of a highlight. Yeah, so now you can see how I was able to use the glasses as a checkpoint, and kind of now I can move on to the rest of the face, the bottom part, without having to worry too much about the wash being uneven. So usually when you know something is going to be covered by a super dark value, you usually can give yourself permission to have a wash that's not as even. Even the hair next to the ear is going to be much darker, and so it's okay that the transition from the hair to the ear isn't 100% fluid or gradual. And even if you mess up a major area that's supposed to be gradual and you just lose the wetness of the wash, that's fine. As long as it's in the first wash, usually you're gonna be okay. There's no need to worry too much. If you look at Stan Miller's tutorials here on YouTube, for example, and I think they're like genuinely some of the best watercolor tutorials I've ever seen, everywhere. If you look at them, he's really not worried about the color drying up. I mean, he does mention a bit that you want to keep your wash even, but he basically just puts paint, and where it's dark he puts it dark, where it's light he puts it light, and he doesn't really care about how things mix on a macro level. He's kind of more concerned about getting the what I like to call patches of color correctly. So you get it dark there, light here, which is pretty amazing. It just lets you, it frees you from all the baggage of making sure that many things are working properly when it's maybe too early to be so worried about them, So anyway, I left a small highlight above the kind of the upper lip there. You can see it's just the paper white. Also, the highlights on the nose are very important here. Now, this entire area is going to be much darker, so it's still hard to see exactly what's going to come out of it, but I assure you it's going to be much darker, and then the shape of the lips and the teeth and everything is going to be so much clearer. Right now, the highlights on the teeth probably look pretty glaring, but we're gonna tone them down later. I'm actually really pleased with this as a first wash. You see there's a lot of color to it, there's a lot of life to it, there's the highlights, there's some value dispersion already. You can see that, for example, the areas of the eyes are a little darker, the area under the nose is a little darker. There's also slight darkness between the right and left side of the nose, the right side being a little darker, but it's barely noticeable. But still, it's kind of a good way of starting things out. And as you can see, all I'm doing is using these three colors and varying the wash, and you can see how much of a variety you can get that way. Later on, when I'm gonna layer up more of these, you'll see me using green as shadow color, and I just really start to love this color combination. So onwards with the next wash. And with this one, I tend to expect it to get as dark as I need it to, and it never does, because it does take more than 2 washes in many cases, unless you're going super dark. Like with the Santa Claus portrait, I went super duper dark, and then it was it achieved the darkness I wanted pretty instantly. So what I'm doing now is I'm covering up basically all of the hair, I believe, because all of it needs to be darker. It's just that in the first wash, I didn't wanted it to be fluid. Okay, you always have this kind of a you need to pull from opposite directions when it comes to these washes, the initial ones. On the one hand, you want to get some information about the values in, as I mentioned, you want to get some definition of what's dark and what's light. But on the other hand, if you go too dark, the paint just becomes really it dries fast. It's not wet enough, because you always have this trade-off of wet color versus dry and dark color. So you really need to be careful, and sometimes you have no choice. If you want to get an even wash, you have to start a little lighter. Okay, you can start darker, but it may not turn out really well, especially if you're doing the first wash. Later on, even from the second one, you can start going darker. Now, I just want to remind you that this is about double or triple speed, so don't be mistaken by how fast I am here, because I work really much slower than this. Now, I'm not afraid to do these kinds of more sped up tutorials, especially because this was a super long painting. Okay, it's about it was about 3 hours or 4 hours, I think, and when I cut it up and dropped some of the mixing and stuff like that and left it in real time, it was an hour and a half, which is way too much. So I just decided to run through it. So because I have quite a few tutorials that are more real time, I'm not afraid to share some of these as well. Now, if you look at my palette to the right, it gives you a good idea of the size of this. So this is basically a quarter sheet, which is, I believe, about 11 on 14 inches, like total size, if you don't include the painted area. Okay, if you don't include the tape, which drops about maybe an inch from each side, so it's about like the piece of paper, the actual piece of paper is maybe 11 on 15 or 12 on 15 inches, but minus the tape area, it's like 11 on 14, which is a standard size. I think it's a good size. I find that if you go smaller than that, it's great for just practicing and warm up and things like this, or maybe quick and rough sketches. But if you want to get a result that's let's say more professional and more final, you kind of need that quarter sheet. Not that you can't get a professional result in a smaller piece of paper. Probably a more experienced artist than me can get a better result on a smaller piece of paper, but it gets to a point where it's really hard as a beginner, especially, to include all of the details you want if the piece of paper is too small. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. By the way, I'm really happy with how the podcast is doing. I just reminded of this because right now I'm basically doing the same thing as a podcast. I'm talking to the microphone. So definitely check it out in the description box below. I'm always putting a link to everything there. I'm getting really good feedback on it, so it seems like people are pleased with it, and it has some good information. So definitely I encourage you to give it a shot and try it out. If you're doing some stuff and you just want something to do on the way, maybe you're walking, maybe you're driving, maybe cleaning around the house, and you want just something to listen to, then definitely consider just putting it on, enjoying my voice, hopefully. And yep. So now moving on with this wash, and I find that the second wash is usually the hardest. So with the first wash, you have a lot of freedom. All you have to do is basically conserve your highlights. That's the only concern. Like, be careful not to touch the highlights. With the third wash, or maybe the fourth wash, you're already putting in the super darks, so it just becomes more like drawing, I guess. But with the second wash, this is where most of the heavy lifting of the painting is done. You really have to build those mid values, and I just find the stage to be super challenging. And if you're having a hard time with the beginning, then usually it drags on to the third wash as well, making it much more complex. And you'll see me struggling a bit here with especially the nose area. I don't want to get too strong of a contrast, but then you'll see this now. It's like I'm blending the edges. I'm not sure if it's dark enough, if it's light enough. I'm lighting it up by coming back with just water. It was really a big challenge. I find the drawing stage of the portrait super challenging, and it's something I'm starting to focus on more right now. I'll probably get a good book on portrait drawing as well, because I find that it's really a weakness of mine. Like to produce, the reason why I don't show you the drawing stage of this is that to produce this drawing, I literally like work so slowly and I measure, and it's just not big fun. So if there's something in talking about 2018 goals and stuff like that, one of my main goals is to improve my ability to paint portraits from live models. So what I'm gonna do is once a week, probably I'll just invite a friend or someone who wants to get a portrait done, and I'll just make sure that at least once a week I do a portrait based on a live model, and then probably I'll devote a full day just to portraits in general. So you're going to see a lot more portraits, and they're probably going to be much worse than what you see now, because I'm trying to do them in a more natural way, in a more natural work method, I guess, and to just become better at it. And it's so hard. I think it's, on the one hand, like painting them is easy for me. The hard part is the drawing, just to make it clear. In terms of drawing, landscapes are much easier for me. In terms of painting, portraits are much easier for me. So that's kind of a funny combination that I struggle with at the moment. So yeah, you're going to see a lot more portraits and probably a lot more generic portraits, not by people that I necessarily want to see the portrait, just people off of websites like stock photos websites and like Pixabay, and another one that someone sent me or told me about in a comment that I definitely will check out. Notice how in the shadowy area I kind of let the sleeve blend into the neck, and this is really important. And then on the left area that's a little more well lit, I use starker contrasts, a little starker, not that serious, but this just creates a nice conflict, or kind of a difference or a contrast between the two sides and my approach to them. So hopefully that works out nicely here. Now I'm going to probably come back with a wet brush and blend all of these parts in. I tend to do that quite often. I'll put paint where I think it needs to be, and then I'll come back with a wetter brush and mix it all. So now you see I was able to indicate some of the mid values and a bit of a darker areas, but now I really need to bring out the super darkness, and we're about halfway through this process. And let me tell you, it becomes more challenging with this particular one, because my third wash, which is what I'm working on right now, isn't dry enough, isn't well defined enough. So you'll see me struggling a bit with getting it to look the way I want. I won't be able to get it dark enough, and it's just a thrill to see. So now I'm blending some of the edges of the paint that I just put onto the paper. So this is really cool. 2018, I'm really excited about this year, because it's the second year basically that I create a really, and by the way, I'm using basically way too much. I should drop that word. So it's the second year that I really put a lot of effort in planning my work and my goals and my vision, and it's just so cool to feel this being more grounded in what I want. Very challenging too, because when you're writing down these tasks and goals for the year, you're kind of how should I say this? By the way, notice how I'm not careful enough and I miss some of the highlight of the glasses. But in any case, it's like you're forcing yourself. You're telling yourself, man, I have to achieve this, I forgot the term for what I wanted to say, but in any case. So now I'm dabbing some of that off because I missed the highlight once again. I needed to really focus in this part especially. I think when I did it, it started becoming really late, and I did this painting in 2 sittings. So I finished like half of it, and then I stopped, took a break, and came back or maybe 2/3 and then a third. But anyway, it's kind of, like setting the goals is like bringing your own doom if you don't get them. That's the thing. You start to become accountable for it. So that's like where my mental challenge comes from. But anyway, I think when you aim for something high, you kind of, it's like aim for the stars, shoot for the stars, get to the moon, whatever. So it really does work. And I have big goals for YouTube as well, and for Patreon as well, and for getting my own studio, and a lot of things I'm really excited about. By the way, link to Patreon in the description box. You have everything there if you want to support me there. I told myself that every video on Thursday I'll remind you about Patreon in case you haven't heard about it. So I'm just making sure to do that. It's basically a place that you can donate to my mission, to what I want to achieve, and help me get there financially, and get a reward for it in return for it, in proportion to how much you give. You can check it out. It's really cool. I actually have, I showed like sneak peeks of videos there, and I also talk about the upcoming schedule, some personal updates, and also in the $5 tier you get like 3 or 4 times a week a painting of me with full self-critique of what I could have done better, and it's really high quality. You'll see it's really cool. So now I'm starting to get to the really dark areas, which are the eyes and under the glasses. The one area that's also really dark is the bottom right quarter, basically, of the face. And it was really hard for me, again, because every time I layer it, it feels like too strong of a contrast. Like now, look at how well defined the nostril is. It's way too much. And then I have this temptation to blend it in. But once you add more water and blend it in, you lose a lot of the value. It just becomes lighter, because that's how watercolor works. You add water, it becomes lighter. And you see here I'm a bit timid with getting a darker value there, because I know the right area should be much darker. So it just takes a lot of time. This is another complex wash, especially maybe perhaps because I wasn't able to get all of the details I wanted in the previous one. It turns this one into a much more complex work as well. Sometimes you miss the kind of the mid value, and you go too dark, and then you have to equalize it by adding mid-tones into a darker area. It's just a big complex thing, but I really enjoy it, and it comes much more intuitively to me than painting landscapes and cityscapes and things like that. Landscapes, natural landscapes are much easier for me. City landscapes, it's just, I still don't really have the ability that I want to simplify what I see and tell a how shall I say this, a very well summarized story, that you look at the painting and you think to yourself, yeah, I get it. I get what this scene is all about. And sometimes I get lucky and I'm able to convey that, and most of the time I don't. And it's really, it's an interesting thing, and I always talk about it, how with watercolor, and by the way, this is a good indication of my podcast content. It really is, it sounds like that. So if you're interested in these kinds of topics, then definitely check it out. I talk about it a lot, of how you kind of go through periods with your painting journey. I don't want to project it on others, because I don't know if you're like that too, but for me, at least, I'll keep it personal, and if you can relate, definitely let me know. I feel like I'm always going through periods that I'm really getting the results I want, and it's crazy. It feels amazing, and it looks great, and I'm happy with what I'm doing. And then I go through a time period where nothing works and nothing connects, and it can take, it's usually between like a month for each time period, or I'm not sure exactly, it can change for sure, but right now I feel in the middle of this kind of time period where things don't connect. I do a lot of paintings outside and they don't look the way I want them to. The weather doesn't help as well. It's pretty rainy right now, so it's a little harder, and I try to paint inside a lot, but it's just not the same experience. But in any case, like, nothing almost connects to me, and the colors aren't harmonious in the paintings, and this is, for example, this painting that you're looking at right now. Now I'm indicating kind of the beard and the stubble, I guess. The painting you're looking at right now is from the time period where everything did connect, which ended about a week ago. So this one's from 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think I painted this. And it really flips on you. And I always say this, it's like if you, and I mentioned this in a comment too, you you always are disciplined by watercolor. The moment you think you got it, they discipline you. They punch you in the face and tell you, yeah, you don't know anything yet. So it's really funny. You can't really forget that you're still learning. At least that's my experience. But it's nice because when that happens, you know, if you don't have these different sections in your, maybe not sections, but different parts of your journey, if you don't have these different parts that are better and worse, then it doesn't balance out. I mean, even the thought of just producing a masterpiece after masterpiece after masterpiece, it's so bizarre. It doesn't work that way. And I think the more volatile you are, the more things are connecting, basically. So if you have a really good time and you're doing good, and then bam, you get like into a time period where everything is just crap, then I think there's a reason for that. There's stuff you don't know and you need to internalize. And this is what I feel like is going on with me right now. So it's a bit frustrating, I won't lie. And you always wonder, that's the funniest part. Like, was I just lucky up until this point? Or do I really have some talent? Am I really making any progress? And these thoughts they're so funny to me. But, you know, that's part of life and having a learning curve of some sort. So yeah, definitely there's no good without bad and no bad without good. So now I'm putting in the super darks here with the beard and the kind of mustache area, and that was a weird way of saying mustache. But yep, you see, this strong contrast is what makes this beautiful, I think. And if you can get things to be very blurry and unclear in the shadowy area, and then sharp and crystal clear in the light area, I think you can get some really nice results. And this is, I think, what I was able to achieve here. Now, another thing I want to divert your attention to is notice how I deliberately went really warm with the color of the face. I started with the forehead, it's very orangey, and then I moved downwards and it was a bit more rose or purple. And then what happens is that this allows me to come back with the shading part and add more more of depth to it by shading with a cooler blue. Okay, so that way you don't it's not boring, it's interesting. You create interest by shading maybe the warm areas with cool colors, or even vice versa. So this is something that I always aim for. I always aim to preserve not just the highlights, but also preserve the vibrancy of the colors and the warmth in the beginning, so that I can come back with a cooler, darker color and get it in. So with this one, the main shadow colors are basically the phthalo blue and the quinacridone rose mixed together to various mixtures and ratios. And then we have also the greenish shadows. So the green shadows, they're a bit harder to read through the camera, but if you look at his right shoulder, that is to the bottom left area, that's the green I'm talking about. Also, if you look at the eyes, that's the same green, but it's a little hard to tell. I know that. It's a bit hard to tell through the camera. It really warps the colors. So apologies about that. Now, I think the previous part you saw, the section, was when it started to get dark, and now I'm continuing with fresh mind, and just maybe I think it was even a week later or maybe a few days later. So notice how I think you'll be able to feel it. My energy is different. It's newer. It just feels like I'm coming back with full force with painting this, and I have a little more patience as well, which is something again I'm really working on, because I find that I'm really in a hurry, and like, what for? To produce as many paintings as possible. Isn't it better to produce fewer, much better paintings? So this is something I'm working on still. And this is as dark probably as the hair will be, unless I do some wet and wet, which looking at it I probably should have. But this is basically as dark as the hair is gonna become. I don't think I'm gonna make it darker. Notice how I blended some. Oh, by the way, yeah, I got someone on Patreon recommended that I do a video on blending. So this is really something I want to do. I didn't get the chance to talk about it so much. By the way, notice how contaminated my new gamboge is. It's I don't care about these things. Oh, by the way, just a quick note. What I'm doing now is building the mid-tones, the mid-values, because I got the eye and it's dark, and I got the very lighter areas around it, and now I'm building kind of the in-between. Now, it may seem a bit dark, but it's a super wet wash, so it's going to dry much lighter, you're going to see. And then I'm going to blend some of the edges. It's going to be nice. So the blending aspect is something I didn't get to do enough of, and I definitely want to do more of. Blending colors and also blending edges, because it's really important. For example, I think one of the things that make my portraits better is my ability to blend edges in an interesting way. So just if you look at the forehead, on the right part you see the line that I just put, the darkest shadow, and you see how it's broken at the top because I blended it in, and at the bottom it's also a little blended in, but in the middle it's very sharp. Then look at the shadow right above the nose. There's this peak that goes up. That's the shadow between the two sides of the forehead, and on the left side it's a more distinct line. When I move my hand you'll see this, it's more distinct line, and on the right it's more blended in. And this relationship between the hard edges and the soft edges is a large part of what makes watercolor, in my opinion, so magical. It's what separates this medium from many others, the whole deal with the edges. And so this is something that it's really important to pay attention to. And I think one of the things with my especially cityscape paintings or sketches is it's lacking in that quality. Now, the reason it's lacking in that quality is that I sometimes have no idea how to incorporate that kind of thing to a cityscape. Because with the face, it's very obvious to me for some odd reason. And this has been mentioned in the comments multiple times, that it seems like I have a knack for portraits. It seems like I'm good with faces, and it's true. Unfortunately, not so much with the drawing part, but with the painting part. But with landscapes and cityscapes, it's so hard for me to tell what parts should be blended in. Where do I do this? Like, do I do this with the layer that's representing of the farthest thing we can see, or do I do it in something that's in the foreground? It's really hard to tell sometimes, and with the face it's much simpler for some odd reason for me. But in any case, yeah, that's part of my struggle with landscapes at the moment, and especially with cityscapes, because landscapes are a little simpler. You have a bit more freedom, and there's less to simplify in most cases. So anyway, yeah, we're really close to finishing this. There's like 2 more minutes and we're done. I'm also, by the way, working on some courses this year on watercolor, so you'll be happy to hear that, because I've been asked a lot before. I plan on making 3 courses for Udemy specifically, which is a platform for courses. But then the thing I'm most excited about, and sorry, I just had to stretch for a moment. What I'm most excited about is the course that I'm going to make for my own website. And that's going to be it's going to be a series of courses. What I have planned for now is one course that focuses on watercolor basics. So I'm going to take like 5 or 6 principles that are really important, like shapes and drawing and edges and values and things like that. And I'm going to teach them all like from the basis. And I'm going to teach you about the medium itself, the watercolor itself, and the things that make it look good. Like I mentioned, the edges and how it flows and how even it is. And I want this to be a really deep beginner's course. So it's like it should give you basically all of the tools you need to get started and acquire lots of experience. But then I plan on making another course that focuses on color theory and colors, because this is a topic I don't get to cover a lot. And I actually plan for it to save money for you, because I'm going to talk about how to compose minimal palettes and limited palettes and things like that. So I'm really excited about that. And then I'm going to have another course for more advanced principles, and probably some courses that deal with specific landscapes and perhaps lots of demos and things like that. So a lot of good things to come in the watercolor front as well. And that's a good point to wrap this up. So I'm just going to sign it. And this one is basically done. And I used basically once again. I keep using that word. So here's the final result. I really hope you enjoyed this process. Let's conclude this.
Okay, friends, I'm done here, and I'm very pleased with how this one turned out. As you saw in the beginning, I really tried to have an even wash of everything as much as possible, using these small breaks such as the sun, the glasses, and things like this to help me take down the wash. I think my work process here was fairly good. There are some inaccuracies, some areas that could have been a little darker, a little lighter, but overall, the moment I felt like this is pretty much done, I didn't want to add too much to it. And by the way, there's a bit of an angle, so without the angle, it looks something like this, and you saw it also in the picture. I'm very pleased with the highlights, the way just the values seem, and notice how the moment I put in wash after wash after wash, the colors that were and still are not necessarily realistic come together and give a sense of realism because of the accuracy and values, and it is kind of close to the family of maybe skin tones. You can see the reds and the oranges with the shadows being of a different interesting color, and this is what I like to do the most. I like to create some interest, add some of my own touch and flair to these kinds of portraits. So in any case, I really hope you enjoyed this process. I just wanted to give you a brief kind of overview of the result, and let's change the angle and wrap up this video. So friends, this is it. I really hope you enjoyed this process. Here's one final look at the painting. As you can see, it's a rather large one. I think Tai's head is larger than mine in any case in reality, because he's a really smart dude. But in any case, really enjoy this, and you can see you can do tons of things with just 3 primaries. You don't need more than that to create beautiful work, and it's even easier. So in any case, I did this painting in 2 sittings because in the first one it just became too dark to continue, and I like working with natural light, and so when the sun went down, it was just not so good, and also for recording it wasn't so good. So I decided to take a break, got back to it 1 week afterwards, and I have to say that it's a nice experience to take some distance from a painting, and I don't usually do that. So for me it was a bit I'm not used to it. I'm not accustomed to finishing a painting in several sittings, but it was nice taking some distance from it and then seeing it in a bit of a new light. It just feels really refreshed. And I think also if you're stuck, if you're unsure how to proceed with a painting, if you feel like maybe you need some muse, or maybe you ran out of stamina, like painting stamina, which I run out of occasionally, it can be a good idea to take a break and then continue with the work the next time, or the next day, or even after a few days, as long as it's not an urgent project or something like this. By the way, I really like the strong contrast here. This side of my face is a little burnt maybe, but I like it. It's a bit interesting. I usually don't do this much of a strong contrast. So in any case, this is it. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube. Follow me on Snapchat and Instagram. I have a link to my podcast in the description box below, as well as my beginner's drawing course. So check all of these out if you want to learn from me, and if you want to hear me talk about different topics such as art, creativity, productivity, painting, sketching, and just vlogging and what I go through. You can definitely check out the podcast. And this is it. I will see you again in another video really soon. And until then, take care.